At breakfast, the sunlight spilled across the kitchen table in streaks, but it couldn't warm the chill I felt creeping over me. My dad, flipping a slice of toast with the casual precision of someone reciting the weather report, looked up at us with that same infuriating, rehearsed calm. "We've booked a trip to Italy," he said. "Just the 6 of us." I froze mid-sip of my coffee, letting the bitter warmth anchor me. The words landed like bricks, not because Italy itself was shocking, but because of the way he said it. No pause, no glance my way, no acknowledgement that I existed as anything more than background noise in the lives of the people I'd loved most. My mom, fork hovering halfway to her mouth, nodded. Just like that. My sister, the one who always seemed to be the star of every family gathering, smiled at her latte, her lips curved in that smug satisfaction of someone who knows a secret and refuses to share it. My brother-in-law was already scrolling through flight options on his phone. And me? I looked down at my plate, tracing the edges of the eggs with my fork, imagining myself dissolving into the table. "Yes," I said finally, soft enough that it barely rippled the air. "Of course." I even smiled, not sarcastically, not bitterly, just enough to let them move on without interruption. I had already guessed this was coming. Weeks of hints, half conversations that stopped when I entered the room, whispers of a big surprise. They had been careful, almost polite in their secrecy, and yet careless enough to assume I wouldn't notice. I chewed slowly, tasting nothing. My dad, master of illusion, had always excelled at painting a picture of fairness. As if I hadn't been the one to quietly bail the family out when things went sideways. As if I hadn't rescued my sister from credit card chaos or covered their mortgage payment after my father's second layoff. As if my contributions weren't threaded through every financial patch they had ever needed. I let them chatter. Florence or Rome. Florence would be hot, my mom said casually. Venice or Tuscany. My sister leaned forward, animated, as if Italy itself was a gift to her, and she was the only one allowed to unwrap it. My brother-in-law was already highlighting wine tours on the tablet. No one asked me what I thought, because in their minds, I was always present but invisible. And maybe that's how I'd allowed it to be. Always nodding, always accommodating, always the silent, reliable fixture, never central, never noticed for what I was. Just a resource to be tapped when needed, erased when inconvenient. The realization didn't sting yet. It was slow, like ice melting on your skin without warning. Later, in the quiet of my apartment, my phone buzzed. A banking alert. $8,450 charged across 3 cities in Italy, hotels, tours, and dinners. My stomach didn't twist from shock. The numbers didn't surprise me. I had already seen it coming. My hands held the phone as though it were an object I didn't know how to interact with anymore. I froze the card, disputed the transactions, and let the app notify the bank that these charges were unauthorized. No anger, no shouts, just an internal settling, like dust falling from a high shelf. My dad, my mom, my sister, they hadn't considered me as a participant in the trip. I realized then that Italy wasn't a vacation. It was a rehearsal of how they treated me every day. I sipped my tea slowly, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, feeling the quiet press against me, a stark contrast to the chaos they created as routine. And in that quiet, I remembered all the other times I had been used without acknowledgement. Christmas Eve, when my seat was given to a neighbor because it's fine, you can handle the kitchen. The wedding anniversary dinner, where I quietly covered $7,500, and it became a punchline to entertain others. Every gesture of mine was treated as infrastructure, invisible labor. I had absorbed every slight, every omission, every casual command as part of my role. And every time I told myself it was love. Now, staring at the ceiling of my apartment, I realized that love had been conditional. My presence had always been valuable only when it was convenient. Italy was merely the mirror reflecting years of unspoken expectations, of being needed but never valued. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel the clarity of this truth. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't hurt. I was simply awake. When my phone buzzed again, it wasn't with demands, but a lingering shadow of control. Calls from family, messages asking where I was, what had happened. I didn't respond. Not yet. That night, I poured a cup of tea, sank into the sofa, and let the quiet wash over me. Italy hadn't started this pattern. It had only revealed it. And in the revealing, I found the first sense of freedom I had been denied for decades. The next morning, I barely touched my breakfast. The coffee was cold by the time I realized I hadn't stirred in it, my toast untouched. The Italy trip chatter from last night echoed in my head like a recording stuck on repeat. I had spent decades performing a quiet choreography. Smile when asked, nod when expected, pay when needed. And for what? To be considered optional, like a footnote in the story of my own family? I remembered the first time I'd noticed the pattern years ago. My dad had lost a job that seemed stable enough to trust. The house they were living in was on the brink, the mortgage at risk. Without a word, I transferred the down payment for my savings, hiding it as if it were invisible. My parents thanked me once, briefly, then moved on, never once asking what it had cost me, never asking how it felt to carry the weight of a family decision I hadn't consented to. I had done it because I loved them, because I thought that's what love required, sacrifice without acknowledgement. Then came my sister's credit disaster. 2 cards maxed out, fees mounting. She panicked, called me in tears, expecting a solution. I stayed up nights, making phone calls, negotiating settlements, restoring her credit score line by line. My contribution became invisible again the moment it cleared. My sister smiled, went about her life, and I went back to being the quiet infrastructure of their lives. The Italy trip, with all its glossy tourist brochures and planned wine tours, was just another chapter in a long-running pattern. It was the most obvious, but not the first. I thought about Christmas Eve, when I had driven 6 hours to a family dinner only to find my seat given away to a neighbor who might bring business. My mother's voice, almost casual, "We figured you'd be fine in the kitchen." That phrase had lodged in my chest, a small, jagged stone I swallowed silently. Then the wedding anniversary, months later. I had quietly paid $7,500 for the dinner at a place I couldn't afford to enjoy myself. The family laughed at my expense, turning me into the punchline of the night. I walked out with a smile, voiding the payment later, but the humiliation lingered. Each incident alone could be dismissed as oversight or miscommunication, but together they formed a chain, each link tightening around my patience. I realized now, lying in my apartment that morning, that the pattern wasn't random. It was intentional, subtle, methodical. My family didn't fail to see me. They failed to value me. My contributions were not recognized as milestones or acts of generosity. They were taken for granted, counted as baseline expectations, permissions to rely without reciprocation. My presence had been conditional, valuable only as long as it was useful. The Italy trip was the tipping point. Not because of the cost, though nearly $8,500 across hotels, flights, and tours was substantial. Not because of the slight, though being ignored in the conversation was painful. It was because it revealed the structural truth I'd been avoiding. My family had never truly seen me as a person with needs and boundaries. I had always been the facilitator, the invisible helper, the silent caretaker of their convenience. I remembered Ethan's words from months ago, standing in my kitchen while I sorted bills. "You know they rely on you more than they respect you, right?" I had brushed it off, as I always did, assuming love required endurance. But now, seeing the charges, recalling every instance I had stepped in quietly, I understood the difference between love and obligation disguised as necessity. I hadn't been loved for who I was. I had been relied on for what I could provide. I spent the morning reviewing my bank statements, tracing back years of financial patterns. There were the payments for renovations they never acknowledged, the utility bills I covered silently, the subscriptions I managed. Each transaction, small and large, formed a roadmap of my invisibility. I wasn't absent by choice. I had been present in a role they never asked me to perform, but never considered optional. By lunchtime, my mind had shifted from shock to calculation. Italy was just the mirror reflecting decades of erosion. I wasn't angry yet, not in the loud, explosive way that stories promise. I was awake, observant, and for the first time, I began thinking not about how I had been taken for granted, but about what I could reclaim. I let the pattern play in my mind like a film. Every holiday, every birthday, every event I had quietly bankrolled, every oversight disguised as mistake, it all added up. It wasn't confusion, it was design. Their casual disregard had been deliberate in its subtlety, creating a reality where I always existed to support, never to be supported. Sitting back in my chair, I felt the first flicker of clarity. Italy was not just a trip. It was a rehearsal of every slight, every expectation, every invisible hand reaching into my life and pulling resources silently without acknowledgement. And I realized that if I didn't act, this pattern would continue indefinitely. The rest of the day passed in a blur of quiet preparation. I didn't call, didn't text, didn't protest. I reviewed all shared accounts, cataloged responsibilities, and mapped out the infrastructure I maintained for them. Italy had shown me the vulnerability of my own generosity. And now I began imagining a different path, one where I existed not as a utility, but as a person. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt measured. I felt the beginnings of empowerment. The rising tension from the Italy announcement had transformed from a sting into a signal. It was time to reclaim my life, quietly, methodically, without the drama they might have expected. By evening, I poured myself a cup of tea, sitting by the window and watching the city lights flicker as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. I wasn't the same Allison who had nodded, smiled, and disappeared in the background. Italy had shown me what I had always known in pieces. My worth was mine to assert, not theirs to define. And that night, before sleep carried me away, I began to plan. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in clarity. Every detail, every system, every financial obligation they had assumed I would cover, they would no longer have access to. Italy was just the opening act. The next morning, sunlight fell in sharp lines across my kitchen floor, highlighting the silence I had carved out for myself. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing to answer messages, not at the right moments or smooth over inconveniences. I simply existed, and in that existence, I could finally see everything clearly. Italy had been a catalyst, but not the cause. The cause was every single time I had been treated as indispensable, but never seen as central. Every time my wallet or my skills or my quiet labor had been taken for granted. Every instance I had allowed myself to be the infrastructure while they took the spotlight. My heart didn't race with anger. It pulsed with recognition, a slow, steady awareness that demanded action. I laid out the map in my mind. Every detail I had kept in silence over the years. The mortgage payment, the utilities, the subscriptions I had managed quietly, the family business logistics I had run without acknowledgement. Each one was a thread in a tapestry that had always favored them while erasing me. And for the first time, I saw the tapestry for what it really was. Not a picture of love, but a system built to exploit. It wasn't about Italy anymore. Italy was just a reflection of decades of invisible labor, of constant compromise, of a role assigned to me without consent. My parents, my sister, even my brother-in-law, they hadn't failed to recognize me. They had chosen, over and over again, to rely on me without valuing me. That realization struck harder than any argument or accusation ever could. I thought about my father, the man who announces trips as though he's reading the weather. Always calm, always detached. My mother, nodding as if my agreement were a given. My sister, smiling as if the world revolved solely around her. My brother-in-law absorbed in his devices. They had rehearsed this life without me, while I had been rehearsing the life for them. The thought made my stomach tighten, not with fear, but with resolve. For hours, I reflected, cataloged, and planned. I reviewed every shared account, every login, every password, every service I managed. My contributions, once invisible, now became points of leverage, and I realized for the first time that I could dismantle the system they relied upon. Not to punish, not to shame, but to reclaim. To assert my existence as separate from my utility. My phone buzzed intermittently with casual inquiries. "Did you see the Italy itinerary? Why didn't you respond to the hotel confirmation?" I let them lie there unanswered. There was no drama in silence. There was clarity. And clarity, I realized, was far more powerful than any argument. I thought about Ethan, my steady presence outside this family chaos. He had always seen the strain, understood the exhaustion I hid behind smiles and nods. "They rely on you more than they respect you," he had said months ago. I had nodded then, brushing it off. Now, I understood that observation as prophecy. His words echoed in my mind, guiding my first conscious steps toward autonomy. By evening, I had drafted a mental plan. Step 1, control communication. Step 2, reclaim financial authority. Step 3, disengage from shared systems. Step 4, document everything. Each step was deliberate, unemotional, structured, designed not for revenge, but for preservation. I wasn't impulsive, I was methodical. I sat with my tea, listening to the quiet hum of the apartment. It felt strange at first, almost disorienting. Silence had been a luxury I rarely afforded myself, because my life had always been about service, about managing crises that weren't mine to manage. Yet in this strange quiet, I felt my center return. I felt the weight of years of exploitation lift slightly, not gone entirely, but acknowledged, named, understood. The first step wasn't public or dramatic. It was internal. I let the full picture of their behavior settle in my mind. No gloss, no excuses. I counted the times I had bailed them out financially, the moments I had smoothed over awkward social situations, the evenings I had sacrificed for their convenience. I acknowledged it, named it, and let it exist as a fact, separate from my emotions. Next, I turned my attention to the future. Italy had revealed the cracks in their assumptions about me. If I didn't act, the next incident, whatever shape it took, would follow the same script. But now I could write my own. I didn't need to yell or cry or argue. I only needed to act strategically, reclaiming the structures they had assumed were permanent, and in doing so, reclaiming myself. By nightfall, I had decided I would dismantle the invisible scaffolding I had provided for them, step by step. No threats, no announcements, no dramatics, just quiet, precise action. Italy had shown me the cost of my absence and the weight of my presence. Now it would be different. I wouldn't disappear into the background anymore. I poured another cup of tea and watched the city lights blink in the window pane, imagining the family in their lavish breakfast in Italy, oblivious to the storm of clarity forming in my mind. And for the first time in years, I felt light. Not triumphant, not angry, just light, free of the obligations they had assumed I would always fulfill. The turning point was simple. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was awareness, recognition, and in that quiet awakening, I realized I had the power to redefine everything. Italy hadn't changed them, but it had changed me, and that change would shape every action that followed. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight spilling across my apartment floor, feeling an unfamiliar weightlessness. Italy had been the mirror, showing me decades of quiet labor, unnoticed efforts, and assumed availability. But now the mirror was just that, a reflection. I needed action. Step 1, control communication. The family group chat, always buzzing with reminders, casual inquiries, and subtle digs, had become a conduit for their expectations. I opened the app, reading each message as if it were an instruction manual. Flights, hotels, wine tours, even reminders about my previous contributions. They were all there. I muted the chat. Notifications silenced. I didn't respond. For the first time, their voices existed without requiring my mediation. It was disorienting but freeing. Step 2. Reclaim financial authority. Italy had revealed the extent of their assumption that my resources were theirs. I reviewed every shared account, every payment method, every subscription linked to my name. Hotel bookings, wine tours, city tours, they had used my card without asking, assuming consent. I froze the card, disputed the charges, and let the bank know they were unauthorized. No drama, no confrontation, just a simple assertion of boundaries. As I sat back, sipping my tea, I realized how methodical I could be. Every transaction I had covered in silence, the mortgage down payment, credit repairs, utility bills, business loans, had been an invisible scaffolding for their lives. And now I could remove it, piece by piece, reclaiming autonomy without shouting or yelling. The quiet power of inaction was sharper than any argument I could have made. Step 3. Disengage from shared systems. My family's home, the devices, the cloud accounts, the smart locks, and even the Wi-Fi were all tied to licenses under my name. Each system was a thread in the web of dependency they assumed was permanent. I began revoking access, changing passwords, and resetting accounts. Their scramble in Florence, I imagined, would be immediate, but I didn't feel satisfaction, only clarity. They had never truly owned these conveniences. They had only been allowed to exist because I maintained them. Step 4. Document everything. I created a secure folder, cataloging transactions, payments, and interactions that had silently defined my role for years. Every hotel booking, every family dinner, every shared bill, every message, time-stamped and categorized. I wasn't preparing for revenge. I was creating clarity, a record of reality that no one could dispute. This was not about punishment, it was about reclaiming the truth. By the afternoon, the family had begun to realize something was different. Messages in the chat went unanswered. Their casual inquiries met only with silence. They were used to my presence being both constant and invisible. Now the absence was tangible. I imagined their frustration as Italy's skyline passed beneath their plane windows. The guides, the tours, the carefully planned breakfasts, they had assumed I was a ghost in the background, always available. But now I was real and I was absent. Step 5. Reassert personal boundaries. For years, their needs had been a script I performed without questioning. Now I drew lines. Shared bills reverted to them. Subscriptions ended. Access to my accounts, which had quietly supported their convenience, disappeared. No explanations. No apologies. Just facts. I wasn't retaliating. I was dismantling the assumption that my life existed solely to maintain theirs. Step 6. Shift mindset from guilt to clarity. They had always framed my actions in terms of gratitude or obligation. Now, I framed them in terms of self-respect. Italy had been the moment when I finally stopped asking why they treated me this way and started asking what I would allow. The answer was simple. Not this. Not any longer. Their entitlement would no longer dictate my actions. By evening, the apartment felt different. Empty, yes, but not lonely. Clean, not in the sense of physical tidiness, but in emotional space. I could hear myself breathe, could think without interruption, could plan without guilt. The clarity of my actions brought a strange serenity. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to their expectations. I was defining my own existence. When I checked my accounts again, the notifications made it obvious. Italy had been a rehearsal, a culmination of years of taking me for granted. But the scramble that would follow wouldn't matter to me. I wasn't present to rescue them anymore. I had drawn the blueprint for detachment, and I was ready to implement it fully. I poured another cup of tea, letting the warmth seep into my hands, imagining them in their carefully curated hotel in Florence, scrolling through itineraries, frustrated at the sudden glitches and obstacles. And I felt no glee, only understanding. They had never relied on me because of love, only because I had allowed them to. And now that allowance had ended, for the first time, I considered the consequences without fear. Italy had revealed a truth I had been avoiding for years. And now the actions I had taken, the freezing of cards, the muting of messages, the suspension of systems, were just the first layer of a larger shift. I wasn't done. I had more to reclaim, more to secure, more to protect. But for the first time, the map was clear. The route forward wasn't chaotic or reactive. It was intentional and structured. And in that structure, I found a strange kind of calm. I wasn't acting out of anger or spite or desperation. I was acting for myself. For the first time in years, my life was not about their convenience. It was about my existence, defined not by what I provided, but by who I was. Italy had been the mirror, but now the reflection was mine to shape. By the next morning, the repercussions of my silence and decisive actions had begun to ripple through my family. Messages flooded the group chat like a sudden downpour. Flustered, confused, angry. "Why can't I log into the hotel app?" my sister typed. "The Wi-Fi isn't working." "Did you change something?" my dad messaged, followed immediately by a flurry of missed calls. I didn't respond. Not a single word. I let the notifications pile up, a physical manifestation of the boundaries I had quietly installed. I poured a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the city move below me, imagining the chaos in Florence, the tours they had planned, the breakfasts they had anticipated, all suddenly disrupted by the infrastructure they had taken for granted. And I felt only clarity, not glee. For years, I had been their fixer, their quiet supporter, their invisible backbone. Now they were confronting the vacuum I had left, and for the first time, they felt the inconvenience they had always imposed on me. The scramble wasn't punishment, it was recognition. They were experiencing the consequences of assuming I would always absorb their mistakes and oversights. By mid-afternoon, I had begun the next phase, reaffirming my personal boundaries in a tangible way. Shared accounts reverted. Subscriptions ended. Access to systems I had maintained, smart locks, Wi-Fi, cloud storage, disappeared. No warnings, no emotional appeals, no justification. Just facts. This wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. I had spent decades providing infrastructure for them without acknowledgement, and now they had to exist without it. The messages escalated. Calls overlapped. Voicemails piled up. My mother's voice, shaky and almost pleading, came through first. "Allison, this isn't like you. Why would you do this?" Then my father, "We did everything for you. How could you?" My sister, in a mix of laughter and irritation, said, "You're making a scene. Find a hobby or something." I let all of it exist without comment. I wasn't avoiding them, I was observing. Each word, each tone, each tactic revealed the same pattern I had traced for years. Their fear wasn't of losing me. It was of losing the benefits I provided without resistance. That night, after a long silence, my phone buzzed with another message. My mother's words hit differently this time. "Allison is no longer part of this family. Do not contact her. She isn't well." I laughed, not out of malice, but out of recognition. Isn't well. Predictable. Convenient. Their narrative always neat and controlled. Reducing me to a problem instead of acknowledging their role. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Silence had become more powerful than any argument. By the next morning, the public spin had begun. Vague social media posts about betrayal and estrangement. My sister reassured the comments that family sticks together. No one noticed that the version of me they were discrediting no longer existed. I had stepped outside the system they controlled and was observing from a distance. Still, the family's scramble continued. They arrived at my apartment 3 days later, unannounced, like actors in a low-budget intervention. I opened the door, Ethan at my side, calm and steady. They stood there, rehearsed expressions of concern plastered on their faces. My mom spoke first. "We didn't come to fight. We want to make it right." My sister followed with tears. "We miss you." I looked at them, my hands holding the edge of the doorway. And I said calmly, deliberately, "You don't miss me. You miss what I gave you." The tears came, immediate, performative, predictable. My mother's voice wavered. We didn't realize how far this had gone. I asked one question. "How far did it have to go for you to see me?" My father tried to pivot. "Let's heal." But this wasn't healing. This was negotiation. They wanted to reassert their control, to restore their version of normal. I didn't move. I didn't open the door. I wasn't engaging. I simply stated the truth they couldn't undo. I only mattered when I was useful. Not anymore. For the first time, their control had no purchase. They realized that absence wasn't collapse, it was exposure. Their authority, their entitlement, their casual disregard for me. It all became visible, undeniable. They had relied on me for decades, and now I existed independently of their assumptions. I left them on the porch, stunned, like they had expected my compliance to be automatic. And in that moment, I understood the clarity that had brought me here. I hadn't walked away because of Italy. I hadn't acted out of anger or revenge. I walked away because for years I had been invisible, used, and undervalued. And for the first time, I chose myself. Italy had merely been the mirror. The true journey began in that quiet morning, in the deliberate refusal to be drawn back into patterns that had defined my life. I stepped inside, closed the door, and left them there. The world outside my apartment was calm, silent, unbroken by the chaos they had tried to orchestrate. For the first time, I felt the weight of autonomy, the profound peace of finally existing for myself. The morning after they had stood on my porch, silent and stunned, I felt a calm I hadn't known in decades. Italy hadn't broken me. It had only revealed the truth. I was never valued for who I was, only for what I provided. And now I had reclaimed my life. I began with the last pieces of the infrastructure they had assumed was theirs. Shared family accounts were officially severed. Subscriptions they had relied upon vanished. Access to my personal systems, the cloud storage, and smart home devices all gone. Each action was precise, unemotional, factual. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was reclaiming ownership over my own life. Next, I focused on documentation. Every instance of my contributions over the past several years, the payments, the bills, the hotel bookings, the wedding costs, the mortgage assistance, the business support, was exported, cataloged, and timestamped. Files were labeled clearly: florencehotel.pdf, christmasdinner.jpg, mortgagefreeze.pdf. Nothing was added, nothing removed. Just facts. I shared the documentation selectively with cousins, family friends, and anyone who had witnessed the dynamic but never fully understood it. I didn't need to explain, to justify, or to lecture. The facts spoke for themselves. They showed not a rebellion, but a life long misrepresented and undervalued. Meanwhile, the family's attempts to regain control sputtered. Calls went unanswered. Messages were ignored. Their frustration became visible, tangible, and still I remained calm. I was no longer reacting emotionally because I had finally detached my worth from their perception. I had stepped out of the system they had built, and in doing so, I had found clarity. Social media became a battlefield, albeit one I observed from a distance. Vague posts about betrayal, comments filled with sympathy for my family, my sister attempting to spin the narrative to her advantage. None of it touched me. I didn't need to defend myself. My silence and my documentation had rendered their manipulations impotent. Eventually, a final message came through from my mother. "What are we supposed to do now?" I answered with calm honesty, "Rebuild or don't, but not on my back." That was all. No lectures, no emotion, no justification. I had drawn the line. I had stepped outside the expectations that had defined my entire adult life. In the days that followed, I made space for myself in ways I hadn't before. I filled the apartment with light, with books, with tea and quiet reflection. The absence of constant demands and subtle manipulations was deafening, but in that silence I could hear myself, my own desires, my own worth, my own life. I thought about Italy often in those first weeks of independence, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Italy had been the mirror, the moment that revealed the pattern that had always existed. It hadn't caused pain, it had revealed it. And once revealed, it became manageable, actionable, and ultimately transformable. Ethan, quiet and steady, remained a presence in my life. He didn't offer advice or judgments. He simply watched, supported, and allowed me to act on my own terms. There was no need for rescue or intervention. My power had always been within me. Italy and the family's disregard simply forced me to notice it. Months later, the family's attempts to re-establish contact dwindled. Missed calls, unanswered texts, and blocked numbers became the new normal. They had relied on my presence for decades, and now they were forced to confront the consequences of that reliance. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I simply existed, fully and autonomously, in the life I had finally claimed. I reflected on the lessons, quietly. Love, I realized, had never required my endurance or financial sacrifice. True love valued presence, not utility. True respect acknowledged effort without expectation of repayment. And true independence wasn't about denying help or withholding generosity. It was about asserting boundaries, reclaiming autonomy, and refusing to let others define my worth. Finally, I archived the family ledger. Not deleted, not discarded, but preserved. The records of every payment, every interaction, every moment of being overlooked were carefully saved. For me, not for revenge, not for shame, but for clarity, for memory, and for proof that my life had always mattered, even when no one else had acknowledged it. The Italy trip became a story I no longer told with anger. It became a story of awakening, of recognition, and of empowerment. It was the moment that illuminated every silent compromise, every invisible labor, every unacknowledged sacrifice. And from it, I emerged not just free of the family's expectations, but strong, calm, and holy myself. I sat by the window one evening, sipping tea, watching the city lights flicker. The apartment was quiet. The past existed, cataloged and understood, but it no longer defined me. I had stepped out of the script, removed the scaffolding, and walked into a life I designed. And for the first time in decades, I felt whole. Italy hadn't been the problem. They had been. And now I was finally completely untethered.